أن نبقى الأوفياء لغزة ومقاومتها. تكبير 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 إنه لجهاد.
Extremism is on the rise in our country. And one of the most noticeable forms recently has been Islamist extremism, particularly since October 7, 2023, when some individuals revealed their true allegiance, openly supporting terrorist organizations like Hezbollah and Hamas. Today, we will discuss this with Jérôme Blanchet-Gravel, who holds a master's degree in religious studies. Hello everyone. Today I want to take a moment to discuss Islam and the extremism we are witnessing. First, let's be clear. There is a significant difference between those who practice Islam as a faith and those who engage in extremist behavior. Over the past year, we have seen individuals in our streets openly praising terrorist organizations. Some have resorted to vandalism as a form of expressing their intifada, and we have even had imams such as Adil Sharkawi call upon Allah to kill the Zionists, referring to Jews. In Montreal, there has been instances where schools have reportedly been influenced by a dominant group of teachers of Maghreb origin, imposing their own rules and Islamic ideologies. This has created a toxic environment within these institutions, where other employees were too scared to speak out against them. We have also seen public displays of mourning for figures like Nasrallah and Yahya Sinwar, leaders of Hezbollah and Hamas across Canada. Additionally, groups affiliated with Samidun have called for the death of Israel, Canada, and United States.
Death to Canada! Death to the United States! And death to Israel!
Addressing these issues is not Islamophobia, but rather an effort to expose extremism and distinguish between radical Islam and peaceful belief. To fully understand why this is happening, we need to look into the foundations of Islam. And today, Jérôme Blanchet-Gravel, editor-in-chief of Libre Media, will provide his insight on the matter. And this video has been dubbed in English for easier comprehension by viewers.
There's a lot to say about Islam. First, what differentiates Islam from all other religions is in fact its political nature, its legal nature. So what people don't know is that Islam, unfortunately, from the very beginning, it's a state actually. Islam is a state. So let's say it starts off a bit problematic in the sense that it's a theocracy. So what people must understand is that Islam is a set of laws. It's a set of legal rules which causes a certain number of fundamentalist Muslims not to want to submit to our laws because they want to keep their laws. So that explains the behavior of some Islamists in court who say they don't recognize Canadian courts. We've also seen it elsewhere in Europe. Why don't they recognize Canadian courts? Because in fact their court is the Sharia court, the Islamic court. So it's really important to understand that, otherwise we don't understand.
Could you explain why there seems to be such leniency towards Islamist extremism in Canada?
There are several factors that explain this leniency. First, in Canada, there's multiculturalism in the Constitution. So in 1982, Pierre Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's father, entrenched multiculturalism in the Constitution, a model of society that sanctifies cultural diversity. So in Canada, cultural and religious diversity is sacred and somewhat untouchable. So this ultimately explains all the questions that concern Islamism are also taboo. We've created a taboo in Canada, so we don't dare tackle these questions. It's true elsewhere, but it's especially true here. Then there is a very clear lack of courage from the authorities. People don't want to take risks. They're afraid to speak up, afraid of being accused of being Islamophobic, etc. So obviously there's fear of being accused of hate speech. We really need to break out of this mindset to be able to criticize Islam, which is not a race, by the way. Muslims come in all races. They come in all colors. Islam is multiracial. It's for everyone, actually, just like Christianity. We need to move away from this mindset of accusation and phobia, ultimately, to be able to discuss these issues relating to integration as we see. And it's just a matter of time. In Canada, it was only a matter of time before Islam. The issue of Islamism came back to the forefront. During the pandemic, there was a kind of media eclipse, but you could even say that Islamist networks somewhat took advantage of that calm to continue infiltrating, really imposing themselves in Canada. It's nothing surprising. We've seen it in Europe for 20 years. It's just a matter of time before it comes back in Canada.
Do you think strengthening secularism laws will really make a difference?
Secularism is a great principle, a principle that I personally value. But that won't be enough. That is to say, to counter the Islamist offensive in institutions, in schools in Quebec, we will first need to assert ourselves as a people, then say that, well, where we come from, why we are here, stop apologizing for existing too. There is always that. So secularism, it's a nice speech, but we will have to go further. And secularism should not also serve to erase our own past, as we have seen, for example, with the removal of the crucifix. Well, we can debate whether his place was legitimate there in the National Assembly, but as long as Quebecers remain so passive, as long as they don't dare to assert themselves, in fact, we cannot expect to recover or reclaim or eventually win back the lost school territories. In France, they talk about reclaiming the lost territories of the Republic, so no, I don't think secularism will be enough, especially since, well, it's a state policy mixed with a whole bunch of bureaucratic rules. So there's a kind of bureaucratic secularism that, no, won't be enough to respond.
Can you explain why we are seeing more extremism emerging from this religion?
In Islam, from the beginning, it's unfortunate and it's repeated. There are many Muslims who have a different view. They actually manage to have a more spiritual relationship with their God than a political one. So the problem is the politicians. So there are Muslims who have somewhat implemented a kind of reform themselves, meaning an approach that is more compatible with Western societies. There should be an official reform of Islam, but it's more complicated than that, because we know there are Shia, Sunni, they don't get along. There's no institution like the Catholic Church that can oversee all that. Imams are autonomous, but why are they more extremists than before? First, I think they aren't more than before. I think there are as many. It's just that we saw them less. And obviously, there's the whole issue of Palestine and Israel. So the extremists, the Islamists' first immigration has indeed helped to increase their numbers in Canada faster than that of Israel. Also, of course, we will welcome people coming from Maghreb countries, etc. Okay, possibly even Islamists, unfortunately. And we understand that moderate Muslims are the main victims of Islamists here and there. But we might still want, in Quebec, for example, to favor Maghreb immigration for linguistic criteria. Is language always the criterion to prioritize? I don't think so. I think in Quebec we would do better to favor Latin American immigration. So why don't we see more for all those reasons? And also, that's it, because they also feel legitimized since October 7th and Israel's response to ultimately Hamas. So that's something that needs to be said. It really galvanizes many Islamists, the whole issue of Palestine. So they feel entitled, by the left, in fact, which dominates Canada's institutions, to hold these speeches in the streets, etc. Even speeches of an anti-Semitic nature, quite often. It's quite incredible.
What explains why we see more Islamist extremist movements here in Canada compared to countries like the United Arab Emirates, where Islam is more prevalent?
Well, I think authorities are often less tolerant over there towards extremists than here. Here, we are much more tolerant, for example, than the Moroccan authorities would be towards Islamist movements. So that's already a factor. Then there's a radicalized Muslim and Islamist diaspora, meaning there are Muslims who came here, Islamists who came here to conquer Western territories. So they're on a kind of spiritual mission, a sort of civilizing mission, if you will. So their goal, indeed the goal of some Islamists, has been to actually conquer the West. So That's not a conspiracy theory. There are well-known scholars like Gilles Kepel who have been working on this for 20, 30, 40 years. So once again, there's nothing new in France. We've seen this for 30, 40 years. In the United Kingdom, it's the same. So we in Canada think that we will be spared from this, but that's not true at all, because Canada didn't have colonies, because Canada obviously didn't participate in the Algerian War in France. That's a big deal. But Canadians seem to naively think they'll be spared from a phenomenon which in fact is global and spares almost no country where Islam is growing.
Are Islamic values compatible with secular or Christian values?
I think many Muslims are compatible with Western societies, meaning as individuals. They are capable of understanding that in a society where there's separation of powers, the rules are different. So I think a large number of Muslims can live in our countries. Well, we say democratic, etc., but Islamism as a system of thought, as an ideology, is a totalitarian system. In essence, it's a totalitarianism, Islamism, and we cannot tolerate people who, in fact, support pro-totalitarian discourses. So, we must oppose, in fact, all totalitarianisms, be it health-related totalitarianism, Sovietism, etc. Islamism is part of it. It's an ideology that threatens democracy, and we must have the courage to say it.
What do you think about the fact that people here are now supporting terrorist leaders or groups like Samidun, which has called for the death of Israel, Canada, and United States, including here in Vancouver?
I find it unacceptable. Honestly, it's an incredible misstep for Canadian society. Even in Arab countries, it would be unimaginable to let those people express themselves so unapologetically. There's a lot of talk about propaganda, foreign interference. There's talk of misinformation. So why, in fact, shouldn't these discourses be considered a form of foreign interference in the sense that it is about promoting, for instance, organizations, terrorists, who are also people, de facto foreign. So, of course, there's Hezbollah propaganda, there's Hamas propaganda in Canada. So if Canada considers these to be terrorist organizations, and they are terrorist organizations, Canada has the responsibility to not tolerating actually those kinds of speeches. We must ensure that those people are at least monitored and hopefully watched by security services, but they probably already are to some extent. But no, it's unacceptable. Actually, it's outrageous. I can't imagine that people, even in the economy, could have neighbors who support Hamas. I find that really idiotic. It's unbelievable. I think we've really reached the limits of multiculturalism.
Quebec has become a secular province, yet radical Islam has reportedly increased in our streets over the past year. Even the mayor of Montreal, Valérie Plante, seems to silently participating by integrating a woman wearing a hijab into the entrance board at the City Hall. What is your view on this?
Well, it's what we call Islamo-leftism in France. It means there's a whole myth on the left. On the left, they see the Muslim world as the new proletariat. It's a bit of a limit. It's the new proletariat destined to make the revolution. They think Palestinians oppose American capitalism represented by Israel and so on. So you have to say that on the left, there is this myth. That is the myth that the Muslim world fights capitalism, particularly Western and American capitalism. So really, we're steeped in the myth here. We're in ideology. So Valérie Plante is part of this very childish movement, actually very immature, as logic. So I find it's awkward, but it aligns with what we call Islamo-leftism. So it's not, we see it in Quebec Solidaire too. To participate in regarding Islamism, this kind of unspoken defense of Islamism, it's serious. It's extremely serious because there is no example. There's no school of thought more incompatible with leftist values like feminism than Islamism. So it's really crazy. You can't support feminism and Islamism at the same time, but there are leftists who still manage to do that. It's quite an achievement.
Don't forget to support our independent journalism. Freedom of expression, freedom of speech have a cost. And it's because of all of you that we are existing. So I encourage you to give, if it's just $1, to rebelfieldreports.com to chip in to support our journalism. And please share our content because it helps us to counter censorship. Thanks in advance.